The House will be in order. Members will please take their conversations off the floor. The gentleman deserves to be heard. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And what I'd like to do is to read again this amendment, because once I've read it, I imagine that everyone in this House of Representatives will embrace this amendment, this final amendment to the bill, and will vote in favor of this amendment. It says, nothing in this act or any...
Members, please take your conversations off the floor. Gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you. Nothing in this act or any amendment made by this act shall be construed to limit or restrict the ability of the Federal Communications Commission to adopt a rule or to amend an existing rule to protect online privacy, including requirements in such rule that prohibit licensees or regulated entities from mandating that job applicants or employees disclose confidential passwords to social networking websites. What this amendment does is it says you cannot demand as a condition of employment that somebody reveal a confidential password to their Facebook, to their Flickr, to their Twitter, to whatever their account may be. And it only makes sense because those that are using these kinds of social media have an expectation of privacy. They have an expectation that their right to free speech or their right to free religion will be respected when they use these social media outlets. Now, if an employer wants to pose or impersonate the individual who's had to turn over their confidential password, that employer, I think, will be able to reach into personal, private information of the user, of the Facebook user, for instance, or the Facebook member, or of the person who's communicating with them, the friend of the Facebook user. So there are two sides to this, both the user of the Facebook as well as those people who correspond with them that have an expectation of privacy. Now, these kinds of communications are going to be very personal, and Facebook itself, in a original post dated March 23, 2012, says, in recent months, we've seen a distressing increase in reports of employers or others seeking to gain inappropriate access to people's Facebook profiles or private information. This practice undermines the privacy expectations and the security of both the user and the user's friends. It also potentially exposes the employer who seeks this access to unanticipated legal liability. They continue, the most alarming of these practices is the reported incidences of employers asking prospective or actual employees to reveal their passwords. If you are a Facebook user, you should never have to share your password, let anyone access your account, or do anything that might jeopardize the security of your account or violate the privacy of your friends. This is a very simple, straightforward amendment. It is one that everybody ought to embrace. Now, some people might say, well, shouldn't an employer have this right? Well, employers can always do what they've done for years, which is to check references, to do background checks, but to do it as themselves, not as an imposter. Not as an imposter. They can do it directly. So if my reference is being checked, somebody knows that they're dealing with my employer, not some imposter.
Gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's just that simple. People have an expectation of privacy, both the user and their friend. there's clearly the potential for liability to an employer or somebody who comes in and misuses the confidential password. And there's already plenty available to employers to do the background checks that they may need without posing and using the confidential password. This amendment is simple, it's straightforward. I urge its passage. It is the final amendment that we will present to this bill.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman yield.
I would yield to my friend.
I certainly appreciate it. I've been working on legislation similar to this, and if the gentleman would withdraw, I would be happy to work with him to craft fine legislative language that could be acceptable to all sides, including national security interests.
Taking back my time from my friend from North Carolina, I would love to work with you, but this is the amendment that we're proposing to this bill at this time. And I am asking for a vote on this bill at this time. And with that, Mr. Speaker, again, this is a straightforward amendment. It's one everybody should vote for. With that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the motion to recommit.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I thank the gentleman, and I would just like to draw your attention to several points. First of all, we had a very open process with hearings in the Energy and Commerce Communications and Technology Subcommittee. This issue didn't come up. We had markup in the subcommittee. No amendments offered to this nature. We had a markup in the full committee. No amendments offered. We had an opportunity for all members to offer amendments on the floor where they could be thoughtfully debated, and this amendment was not put in this context, and now it suddenly appears before us at the last minute of this day. So it would have been helpful to be able to have this discussion because many of us share the concern that the gentleman's talking about. I think it's awful that employers think they can demand our passwords and go snoop around. There's no disagreement with that. Here's the flaw. Here's the flaw. Your amendment doesn't protect them. It doesn't do that. Actually, what this amendment does is say all of the reforms that we're trying to put in place at the Federal Communications Commission to have them have an open and transparent process where they are required to publish their rules in advance so you could see what they're proposing. That basically be shoved aside, and they can do whatever they wanted on privacy if they wanted to, and you wouldn't know until they publish their text afterwards. And there's no protection here. There's nothing there to enforce. What this amendment, this motion to instruct does here at the last minute, if we could have had time to work this out ahead of time, we might have figured out something we both agree on. No, I won't. What we have here is a problem that you exempt from the process. You don't protect the consumer. And there are many of us who, after this debate concludes and moves on, would be happy to work with you on legislation because I think this is a real issue that we all share, and that is protecting privacy. This doesn't do that, and in fact, you could open the door where they could allow employers and licensees to go after your stuff, and you wouldn't know until they publish the rule. So I urge a no vote on this motion to instruct, and I return the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the motion to recommit. Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The noes have it.
Like a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of passage.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I happen to have been a plaintiff in a case before the Supreme Court about 10 years ago, and we all thought it was a really big case because they gave us 2 hours of oral argument instead of 1. 3 days of oral argument. I asked my staff to take a look at the recent past, and we believe you have to go all the way back to Brown versus Board of Education to find a case in which the court has granted so much oral argument. So we all understand this is a very, very significant lawsuit. These attorney generals, some of whom are behind us that you'll hear from later, were key in bringing this litigation. I think we all believe that if the federal government under the Commerce Clause can order you to buy a product and tell you what kind of product to buy, there's not much left of the Commerce Clause. In listening to the questioning of the judges, it struck me that the 4 more liberal judges were mainly peppering the plaintiff's counsel, and the other 5 were largely, although not exclusively, peppering counsel for the government. What that leads to ultimately we don't know, but we know the suspense will be over in June. Let me finally say that regardless of how the Supreme Court rules on the constitutionality of what I believe is the single worst piece of legislation that's been passed in the time I've been in Congress, it's still a bad idea. And if Senate Republicans become the majority next year, the first item on the agenda of a new Senate Republican majority would be the repeal of Obamacare and the replacement of it with something that makes more sense and is targeted at the problems that we actually have in American health care. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Senator Mike Johans from Nebraska.
Well, thank you, Leader. Just a few impressions, if I could, of what I observed during the arguments today. I think the Leader's thoughts on this are right on target. But I was watching Justice Kennedy very closely. I guess everybody was. And he came right out very quickly in arguments and asked some very, very fundamental questions. The first thing that he pointed out is that if this really is going farther than any other case, which I believe both sides, all sides acknowledge that it is, that there's a substantial burden, a heavy burden on the part of the government to justify their action, to find the authority within the Constitution to do what they're doing. That seems to be right to the heart of what we are talking about today. The second observation that I would point out also came from Justice Kennedy, and he said, you know, this fundamentally changes the relationship between the people and the government. And that's one of the points that we have been making all along, this notion that somehow Congress believes it has the power under the Commerce Clause to force people into commerce who, for whatever reason, choose not to be in commerce, is a stretch beyond anything that our country has ever gone. So, you never know. I mean, these are only arguments. They're asking questions to try to figure out where they're going to settle in here in terms of deciding the case. But I would say today the government had a tough day. That would be my impression. With that, let me turn the microphones over to my colleague, Senator Cornyn.
Thanks, Mike. Well, the reason this case is so important, as you all know, and as Senator Johans points out, is because this legislation does grow the size and the role of government in ways that are really unprecedented in our history. And as we all know, as government grows, individual freedom shrinks. And that's what this case is basically about, is whether we as individual citizens can choose our own health care options or whether the government is going to impose a one-size-fits-all on all of us. And oh, by the way, taking money from Medicare, which is already on a fiscally unsustainable path, to create a new entitlement program and creating a health care plan that where costs will explode dramatically in 2014 as the individual state insurance exchanges are created. So this legislation is not only unaffordable, it makes matters worse when it comes to current programs like Medicare, which are already in bad shape. And it's going to result in a contraction or shrinking of individual freedom in making health care choices, and instead a 15-member unelected board of bureaucrats are going to decide whether your medical care is worth it, or whether the federal government will simply choose not to pay for it because in the cost-benefit analysis of those bureaucrats, it simply isn't worth it. I'll turn it over to Senator Hutchison at this point.
Well, thank you. You know, I think that we've seen these early arguments, yesterday especially, where we were arguing, is it a tax or a mandate? And I thought Justice Roberts certainly said, well, of course, we all know if it's a tax that makes Congress have the capability to do it. He basically said if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck, which means it's a mandate. It is an unconstitutional mandate that will make this whole law unconstitutional. And I think that when you look at what it's doing, it's telling every business in America that they have to subscribe to a government-run health care plan or they can't offer the premiums. It is a mandate that is unsustainable in the Constitution, and I think the justices are beginning to get enough information that we hope they will come to the right decision. There's no question that 2/3 of the American people believe this is an encroachment on their freedom, and I hope that we can change it someday by law, but I hope that we can start all over and have a good health plan for more access by Americans to an insurance that they can afford and that they want. And now I'll turn it over to Senator Marco Rubio from Florida.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you for a few moments. And first of all, I'm very proud that the state of Florida has taken the lead on challenging the constitutionality of this law. We are hopeful that the Supreme Court will see it the way we do, that this law violates simple and basic constitutional principles, particularly in terms of what the role the federal government should play. We don't know exactly how the case is going to turn out, although we're hopeful it will turn out on the side of the Constitution. But we do know this about it for sure, and that is that Obamacare has been a disaster for America and Americans financially. And there's no doubt that our country has a health insurance crisis that has to be confronted. This is the wrong way to confront it. This is the way that undermines and takes away the ability of our economy to grow and prosper. There are thousands upon thousands of small businesses in Florida and across the country that are afraid to grow or hire new people because they have no idea how this law is going to impact them. And so we know for them it's a bad idea. There are other Americans who are beginning to lose their existing health care coverage, breaking a promise that was made by the advocates when they first passed this bill. There are others who are finding difficulty accessing an existing insurance plan that will take them as a result of the changes that have been made. The result is that while we do not know how the case is going to turn out, we already know how Obamacare is turning out. And that is as a job-killing initiative that sets us back in the hopes of arriving at a solution to our health insurance problem in the United States. And so I hope that I can be a part of an effort here to not just vote to repeal Obamacare, but to replace it with initiatives that embrace the private market, embrace free enterprise, embrace individual choice, and at the same time allow us to address the significant public policy issue that we face when it comes to health insurance. Brevemente en español, simplemente quiero estar aquí para decirle que estoy muy agradecido al Estado de la Florida por tomar un papel decisivo en términos de llevar esto a la Corte Suprema. No sabemos cómo la Corte va a encontrar que esta iniciativa viola la Constitución, pero sí sabemos que el plan de salud del presidente Obama ha sido desastroso para la economía de los Estados Unidos. Sabemos que hay miles y miles de pequeños comerciantes y pequeños negocios que no han podido crecer o ampliar sus comercios o traer nuevos empleados porque tienen miedo el impacto que esta ley va a tener sobre ellos. Así que es importante que no solamente esta ley se elimine, sino que también hay una alternativa a esta ley, una alternativa que enfrente el tema serio que enfrenta este país, que es el cuidado de salud para todas nuestras personas. And now it's my honor to introduce you our Attorney General from Florida, who's done a phenomenal job in leading this effort, Pam Bondi.
Thank you, Senator. And we are so blessed to have Senator Rubio and so many great members of Congress here today to support us in this and to stay up here and to continue this fight for us. I can tell you we've been in the courtroom now for 2 days. We feel very confident. We feel very pleased with the questions that the justices have been asking. And as we have said from day one, this is unconstitutional. This is a government overreach like we have never seen before in our history. And we have got to stop it. And that's why we're here this week, and that's why we are in front of the United States Supreme Court. We feel very confident. Tomorrow we will hear another day of argument on the severability issue as well as the Medicaid expansion. But what we can tell you today is we felt very comfortable with the questions that were asked, and we firmly believe this is unconstitutional. And as the justice has said, this would be such an overreach. If the federal government can do this, they can force us to do anything. And that's why we're fighting this with everything we've got. I'd now like to introduce my colleague, Attorney General John Bruning from South Dakota and the next United States Senator.
Thanks. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to my colleagues, Pam Bondi of Florida and Greg Abbott of Texas and Alan Wilson of South Carolina. We have a managing committee of 6 states that manage this manage this litigation. We started as 13 states, mocked roundly across the country by law professors who said this case will never end up in the Supreme Court. You have no opportunity to defeat this legislation in court. Here we stand now at the Supreme Court, and I can tell you I feel a lot better after witnessing 2 hours of argument than I felt when we started. And the reason, I think Senator Johanns said it clearly, all eyes were on Justice Kennedy. Justice Kennedy was very, very skeptical of the mandate and the constitutionality of the mandate, and that makes me feel better about our chances. It's hard to predict always when you stand outside the Supreme Court as to what they're going to do, but I can tell you in keeping with Justice Kennedy's prior decision-making in cases where we've seen him make the decision, he's very skeptical of unlimited congressional power under the Commerce Clause. And so my colleagues and I have been managing this case day to day. We felt great about the questions we heard from the justices. We feel very positive that the mandate will possibly be struck down, and if it is, tomorrow is going to be very important when we talk about severability, because we believe that if the mandate's struck down, the entire law must fall. So with that, I want to introduce my colleague from Texas, Greg Abbott, the Attorney General there. Greg.
Thank you. Today we are one step closer to bringing great disappointment to the United States senators who spoke here earlier. Those senators, as well as Leader McConnell, have talked for 2 years now about repealing and replacing Obamacare. I think after today we will not have to worry about crossing that bridge, because we're getting closer and closer to the court striking down Obamacare altogether. When the states filed this lawsuit, we knew that it was going to be a battle between individual liberty and growing government. And we knew that if we could get the court to agree to focus on whether or not Obamacare unprecedentedly infringed upon individual liberty, we had a chance of winning.
The yeas are 184, the nays are 236. The motion is not adopted. Sorry. It was already called. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for a recorded vote on the bill.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having arisen. A recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. On this vote, the yeas are 247, the nays are 174. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a privileged report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 597. Resolution providing for consideration of the concurrent resolution, House Concurrent Resolution 112, establishing the budget for the United States government for fiscal year 2013 and setting forth appropriate budgetary levels for fiscal years 2014 through 2022, and providing for consideration of motions to suspend the rules.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to remove the name of Mr. Pitts of Pennsylvania as a co-sponsor of H.R. 3596.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, today I was unavoidably detained on the following votes, and I ask unanimous consent that I can place my appropriate votes for roll call number 134, for the Crowley Amendment, to vote aye. Roll call vote 135 for the Eshoo Amendment, to vote aye. And roll call vote number 136 for the Owens of New York Amendment, to vote aye. I ask unanimous consent that may be placed appropriately in the record.
Without objection, the statements will appear in the record.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, additionally, I was unavoidably detained yesterday evening on business, and that was H.R. 2779. That was roll call vote number 127. I would have voted aye. Roll call vote number 128, H.R. 2682. I would have voted aye. And then roll call vote number 129, I would have voted no. And I ask unanimous consent that that be placed appropriately in the record.
Without objection, the statement will appear in the record.
I thank the Speaker.
The Chair will entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition? Without objection, the Speaker is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to commend the phenomenal efforts of the Illinois Patriot Guard and Gold Star families who joined together to launch a traveling tribute to honor our state's fallen heroes. I had the opportunity to view the Illinois Patriot Guard Fallen Heroes Traveling Memorial Wall during its stop at the Kendall VFW post number 3873 in Naperville, Illinois this past week. It was moving beyond words to see the photos of the 272 brave men and women from Illinois who made the ultimate sacrifice for our country during Operations Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom. To date, this memorial has traveled more than 30,000 miles through at least 60 communities throughout the state of Illinois. It paints a powerful portrait of sacrifices made by our troops. As the 30th President, Calvin Coolidge, said, and I quote, "A nation which forgets its defenders will itself be forgotten," end quote. Our fallen soldiers will be remembered forever, and thanks to the families and veterans who put this traveling memorial together, communities across our state have a very special opportunity to gather together in tribute to these heroes. I yield back.
Yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Nevada seek recognition?
Revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, Washington Republicans are showing Nevada families exactly who their priority is. Unfortunately, it's not Nevada middle-class families. This week, Republicans are reiterating their support for taxpayer giveaways for big oil, despite the fact that gas prices are soaring and the oil industry made $137 billion in profits last year. Nevadans are hurting every time they go to the pump. The Republicans' answer to higher gas prices is more government handouts to big oil. This is a wrong priority. But wait, there's more. On Thursday, they'll bring up a new but not improved Ryan budget that once again kills Medicare by turning it over to private insurance companies. The plan is bad. Instead of improving care for Nevada seniors, seniors would be forced to pay thousands more for out-of-pocket for their health care. Nevada is suffering with the highest unemployment rate and highest foreclosure rate in the nation. Republicans, get your priorities straight. We must put Nevada middle-class families and seniors first, not big oil and profit-hungry insurance companies. I yield back the balance of my time.
Back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, Vietnam citizen Ben Thai Loc was convicted of armed robbery of a Chinese restaurant in California in 1996. He received 10 years in prison. He was also ordered by an immigration judge to be deported back to Vietnam. But Vietnam has never taken back the lawfully deported criminal. U.S. law does not allow indefinite incarceration, so after an additional 180 days, Loc was released on American streets. But last weekend, Loc struck again. This time, he murdered 5 people in San Francisco. Mr. Speaker, there should be consequences for countries like Vietnam who fail to take back their lawfully deported criminals. There are several thousand criminals ordered deported back to their native lands where their nations just don't ever get around to taking them back. So I have introduced the Deport Foreign Convicted Criminals Act to prohibit the issuance of diplomatic visas to nations who do not take back their outlaws in a timely manner. The blood of those 5 murdered victims is not only the fault of Loc, but it's also on the hands of the Vietnamese government. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Are there further requests for 1 minute speeches? For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today a number of postmasters from the United States Postal Service were in my office, and they had a very good idea about how important the U.S. Postal Service is, the jobs that it creates, and how we should find solutions. In my own community, heavily occupied by seniors, they cried out when post offices were closed that were close to their community, where they were able to walk and secure their checks. Some of them like to come directly or to handle their business. We are better than closing down post offices in rural and urban America, and we're better than not finding a solution to employ hardworking Americans in an efficient and effective manner. I look forward to working with our postal family, those hardworking Americans all across America who have been the Good Samaritans to determine whether our seniors were in need, bringing medicine to homebound patients, bringing information and helping small businesses. We can work to solve this problem efficiently and effectively. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Are there further requests for 1 minute speeches? Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. LaTourette, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader. The Chair understands that all time yielded by Mr. Dingell will be yielded through Mr. LaTourette.
I thank the Speaker very much, and I understand I can't ask unanimous consent to give half to the Dean of the House, but we're going to work it out. And since we're talking about the parliamentarian, hopefully we'll get a favorable ruling from the parliamentarian on the distribution of time. I'm going to be joined on the Democratic side in this rare burst of bipartisanship by the Dean of the House, Mr. Dingell of Michigan, and a number of members on both sides of the aisle are going to come talk about what to some of us was kind of a shock, and that is the announced retirement of our parliamentarian John Sullivan. And because I'm going to be here for the full hour along with Mr. Dingell, I'm going to yield to members who have other time commitments but want to make sure that they have the opportunity to say what it is they feel they need to express about Mr. Sullivan's service to the House. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to Mr. Thornberry of Texas.
I thank the gentleman from Ohio for yielding. Mr. Speaker, every person elected to the House believes that we're here to do important work on behalf of our district. Of course, the House is bigger than any one issue or any one person, and yet there are a relatively small number of persons who are central to the functioning of this House. Too often, I'm afraid, members get wrapped up in what we're trying to do and maybe take for granted the institution of the House, but it is the institution that is listed in the Constitution. It's the institution that provides the continuity of government as political majorities come and go, and it's the institution that provides the legitimacy and the respect for what we do here. I say all that to make the point that I think in many ways the parliamentarian is the central figure for the institution of the House. Since 1927, there have only been 4 of them, and in my time here, we have been incredibly privileged to have had 2 outstanding public servants, Charles Johnson and John Sullivan, serve in that position. It is with some regret, but even more with respect and gratitude, that we honor the service, but I'd say just as much the character and the intellectual integrity of John Sullivan as he leaves the House to begin a new chapter in his life. As one of those who has benefited from John's steady guidance while I was in the chair, I can testify to his even temper. He guides our proceedings with intellect and logic based on the Constitution, the rules of the House, and our precedents. But at the same time, he is able to factor in the human dimension, taking into account the personality of the person in the chair as well as the persons in the microphone. And that means it's as much art as it is science to keep the House running smoothly. Much of the work he does, of course, is done off the House floor, advising members and staff as to how they can accomplish their goals within the rules and precedents of the House. I have tremendous respect, though, for John's abilities and for his professionalism, but I have even greater appreciation for his commitment to and his love for this institution, for that portion of his heart that he has given to the House for the past 25 years. He has elevated each of us who have worked with him, but more importantly, he has elevated the institution of the House of Representatives, through which government by the people's representatives is possible. He is among our best and brightest, and all of us here and the institution will miss him greatly. I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and to extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on the matter of this special order, referring very specifically to our dear friend, the parliamentarian, Mr. Sullivan.
Without objection, so ordered.
I want to thank the chair for the kindness that you have shown me, and I want to express my particular thanks and good wishes to my dear friend, Mr. LaTourette, and for this matter. And now, through the distinguished gentleman from Ohio, I yield to the distinguished minority leader, my friend, Mr. Hoyer, 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Maybe he has another minute that we could get to, if possible, but I want to thank the gentleman from Michigan, but certainly also my friend from Ohio.
both of whom have served here for a long period of time and love this institution and know how critical the functions are of the parliamentarian. I want to thank them both. Mr. Dingell has had the privilege of serving alongside all four of the men who have been the modern parliamentarians in this House. I've had the privilege of serving with three of them. When the framers of the Constitution wrote Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2, they probably had little idea of the volume of precedents that would accumulate in the 224 years since the House convened and adopted its first rules. Today, the job of parliamentarian is probably one of the most difficult in Washington. A thorough understanding of the rules and precedents is a prerequisite to be an accomplished parliamentarian. John Sullivan has that. One must also, however, have the respect of every member of this House. John Sullivan has that. That is what John Sullivan achieved over the course of his 17 years in the parliamentarian's office. As our parliamentarian for the last 8 of those years, John has sat beside the Speaker's rostrum through some of the most heated floor debates I've ever seen, indeed perhaps in which I've participated. Throughout, he preserved the impartiality of and the high regard for his office in the eyes of both Democrats and Republicans, when Democrats were in charge and when Republicans were in charge. And he demonstrated his keen and incisive command of precedents issuing his rulings. In hearing of John's decision to retire, I was among the many members who felt that they were losing a respected colleague and friend. Because after his tenure here, John Sullivan has left his mark on the House no less than any of us who were elected to serve here by our constituents. And he, no less than ourselves, has served the American people well. As we wish him the best in retirement, we also welcome as our new parliamentarian a man who is eminently qualified to succeed him in office. Tom Wickham has been at John's side throughout his tenure in the parliamentarian's office, and I know John is leaving us in very capable hands. Mr. Speaker, I join you and my colleagues with everyone else who has come to the floor this evening in celebrating John's service to this House and to our nation. I wish him well and thank him for all he has done to preserve the order and with it the honor of the People's House. John, you have been a great public servant in the best traditions of that term. You have been someone, as I said earlier, who has been respected by every leader of both parties. An individual who has listened intently, who has judged fairly, and whose judgments have made this House better. So, John Sullivan, well done. The House's good and faithful servant. Well done as a friend and colleague and advisor. Many of us are better members of this House because of John's counsel through the years. And this House is certainly a better place for his service. And I congratulate him and wish him Godspeed. And I thank the gentleman from Michigan and the gentleman from Ohio for leading this special order to praise and give testimony to the outstanding service of our friend, John Sullivan.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the distinguished minority whip for those observations. It's now my pleasure to yield to the distinguished chairman of the Rules Committee, Mr. Dreyer of California, who sadly, like Mr. Sullivan, has decided to move into retirement, and like Mr. Sullivan, will be greatly missed for his institutional knowledge in the House of Representatives, the gentleman from California.
I thank my friend for yielding, and I want to join the distinguished gentleman from Maryland in expressing appreciation to my friends Messrs. Dingell and LaTourette for taking time out to talk about John Sullivan. And it is true, I decided to follow the Sullivan lead, and I too will be leaving the Congress. I'm going to stay a little longer than John has. I'm going to stay until January, but I will tell you that this place is a much better institution for the service of John Sullivan. I'd like to, Mr. Speaker, begin by associating myself with the remarks of my friend from Maryland with one very important correction. We scurried around over here when my friend said 17 years. It, in fact, is 27 years that John Sullivan has served in the parliamentarian's office, and so I offer that one minor correction to, but very important correction to my friend from Maryland. And I take the well to do something that I don't often do, and that is to read. But the reason I'm doing it is I'm trying to show off the Rules Committee. We're very proud of the fact that the House Committee on Rules, I'd say to my friend from Michigan and my friend from Ohio, however eloquent you all will be in talking about John Sullivan, you have not done what the Rules Committee did last night, and that is pass out a resolution, an enrolled resolution, commemorating the great service of John Sullivan. So I would like to share that with our colleagues, if I might. It says, whereas the Honorable John V. Sullivan has been a committed government servant for over 40 years and worked in the House of Representatives for 27 years, whereas Mr. Sullivan was appointed to the office of the parliamentarian in 1987 and over the ensuing 25 years has served under 6 successive speakers, the past 8 years as parliamentarian to the House of Representatives under the appointments of 3 successive speakers, whereas Mr. Sullivan has displayed extraordinary rigor in the application of pertinent precedent to every parliamentary question and provided sage counsel and advice in matters critical to the institution. Whereas the Committee on Rules constantly relies on the advice, counsel, and expertise of Mr. Sullivan to meet the committee's obligations to the House, whereas Mr. Sullivan has cultivated and led a team of dedicated and nonpartisan deputies, assistants, and clerks committed to ensuring that the decisions of the chair and the operation of the rostrum are regarded by all as fair, accurate, and professional, whereas Mr. Sullivan has served the House during a period of ongoing transition with shifting majorities and has done so to the same standard of nonpartisan excellence expected from the parliamentarian, whereas Mr. Sullivan participated in numerous programs of the House Democracy Partnership, providing advice and counsel to legislators from new and re-emerging democracies around the globe as they work to strengthen their legislative institutions, reform their rules of procedure, and amend their constitutions, whereas Mr. Sullivan has endeavored to update the practices and procedures of the House to reflect developments in technology while remaining faithful to the institution's constitutional underpinnings, and whereas Mr. Sullivan has informed the Speaker that he will be beginning a well-deserved retirement, those are our words, not his, I should say, a well-deserved retirement on the last day of March 2012, now therefore be it resolved that the Committee on Rules on behalf of the Committee and the House expresses its profound gratitude to the Honorable John V. Sullivan for his exemplary record of service and his steady, impartial advice and guidance as the parliamentarian of the House of Representatives, and the clerk of the committee is hereby directed to prepare this resolution in a manner suitable for presentation to Mr. Sullivan. And I signed this, as did the ranking member, my good friend from Rochester, Ms. Slaughter. And so I'd like to say that I look forward, this is suitable for framing. We'll have one for framing, and Mr. Sullivan will be able to have this. But I'd like to, Mr. Speaker, just take a moment, if I might, since everyone will be talking about John's work here. I've mentioned the work up on the Rules Committee, and we did have one whereas clause where we talked about the House Democracy Partnership. I'd like to share with our colleagues the work of the House Democracy Partnership, because not everyone is aware of the projects that the House Democracy Partnership has taken on. It's an extraordinarily bipartisan organization that in the post-September 11th world was designed to focus on strengthening the legislative branches. And I see my good friend from Texas, Mr. Conaway, here, who's a member of our partnership. It's designed to strengthen the legislative branches in new and re-emerging democracies around the world. And my colleague, Mr. Price, and I serve as co-chairs of this effort, and we just established our 17th partner in Central Asia, the country of Kyrgyzstan. And in fact, we're going to be, at the end of this week, be continuing our mission. We're going to be going to two of our partner countries, Kosovo and Macedonia, and we'll be in Libya and Egypt as well, where we're going to be talking about the importance of strong, vibrant parliaments. Well, I've got to say that the House Democracy Partnership and these countries have been the great beneficiaries of John Sullivan's expertise, specifically in Kenya. We had an opportunity to visit Liberia and Kenya, two of our partner countries. We were in Mali as well on this one particular trip. But we were following the very, very tragic aftermath of the '07 elections in Kenya. There was a huge change that took place, lots of disruption, to put it mildly, and Kenya has just gone through a whole constitution reform process. When we were in Kenya, John Sullivan spent time looking at the proposed constitution, meeting with the staff members and members of parliament in Kenya, and he was virtually immediately able to cite a number of discrepancies that took place in the Constitution, and so his very, very shrewd skill and expertise has not only been utilized to the benefit of the United States House of Representatives, but in Kenya and other countries that we have visited, John Sullivan has been able to use his expertise for the expansion of democracies around the world. He's met with a number of our incoming delegations, and it has been, again, extraordinarily important work. And so, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to express my appreciation to John for his work and to express best wishes. We all know that Wick has big shoes to fill, but he's going to do a stellar job in this very, very important position as parliamentarian. And I have to say that I hope very much that as John Sullivan goes into retirement, he will continue, as his predecessor, Charlie Johnson, has, to focus on this institution and also on the imperative of doing what we can to expand self-determination, political pluralism, and the development of democratic institutions around the world as well. So I say congratulations. I'm now going to present this to our friend Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friends for yielding.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I yield 2 minutes to my dear friend from California, Mr. Schiff, through my distinguished friend from Ohio.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I rise to thank our House parliamentarian John Sullivan for his years of service to his nation and to the House of Representatives. John has been a trusted advisor and an honest broker of the rules of the House. He has served at a time when partisan rancor has unfortunately been prevalent in this body, but his integrity and impartiality have remained beyond question and beyond reproach. John joined the office of the parliamentarian 25 years ago, rising to his current role in 2004 when he was appointed by Speaker Hastert. Before joining the office of parliamentarian, he had a distinguished career as an active-duty member of the U.S. Air Force. He also served as respected counsel on the House Armed Services Committee. As parliamentarian, John's keen legal mind and passion for the Constitution has always been apparent. I remember with great fondness working with the parliamentarian on some very difficult issues involving the Armenian genocide, one of the most challenging parliamentary issues I think we faced in terms of how to navigate questions of germaneness. Through that process and every other that I have come to work with a parliamentarian, I have respected his insights, his intellect, his integrity, and his dedication to his job. He has been a phenomenal asset to this institution, and I know that his successor, Tom Wickham, who currently serves as deputy parliamentarian, will continue in John's legacy of professionalism. John, I want to thank you for your service to this body, and I know that my colleagues join me in wishing you the best of luck in future endeavors. Thank you, and I yield back.
Speaker, it's now my pleasure to yield to, and you'll notice a theme here that, there's nothing greater than the honor of being asked by the Speaker, either Mr. Boehner, Mrs. Pelosi, or Mr. Hastert, to be the Speaker pro tem and preside over the House. And